10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 157. Hey everybody, welcome back to yet another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This is episode number 157. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of the show, and we are so happy to have you back for another short and concise 10-minute jazz lesson. This week we're going to continue talking about sus chord tricks, investigate this a little bit further. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from the last episode that this is right up people's alley, some, kind of simple stuff that you can use right away on certain jazz standards or situations that you're going to be in. So before we get into the show, just a reminder that you can get the PDF to this episode and every other episode that we've ever done by going to our Patreon site, and you can get there by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, going over there, supporting us with $3 a month gets you access to everything that we've ever done, and we got a lot of cool stuff coming up in the future that I'm going to be announcing in the next couple of weeks that are going to be added benefits to those Patreon members. And it's only $3 a month. You'll barely miss it, most likely, and it really makes sure that this podcast can keep going into the future with episodes every single week. So I got to give a quick shout out to everybody that's signed up this month to become a supporter. Thank you to Lorenko, Marcia, David, and Jeremy. Thank you guys so much for joining up, pledging your support, keeping the podcast coming at you. We could not do it without all of you folks over on Patreon. We've got over 200 members over there. So if you'd like to become one of those ever important supporters of the show and keep jazz education alive, head over to 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on the Patreon banner today. All right, let's get into today's episode. Okay, so as I mentioned, today is going to be on sus chords again and give you actionable items that you can kind of take with you and use over these chords, even if you have a gig or a jam session tonight. These are really simple concepts that should be fairly easy to put into your playing. So last week we talked about two different pentatonic scales that you could use that kind of avoid the fourth of the chord. This week we're going to talk about triads and playing with a couple different triads over a sus chord. Give you two different options, one that is very basic that you can get in probably the next 10 minutes, and one that's a little bit more difficult, but that I think all of you out there can definitely grasp and use very shortly. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, let's say we have a G7 sus chord. A fantastic structure to play over this chord that keeps the openness of the sus sound, right? The importance being placed on that fourth. And also the seventh is a really important note because the two things that are defining this chord are the C being the fourth, the sustained note, that's why it's called the sus chord, and the fact that it's dominant 7, right? So that flat 7. Those are two really, really important sounds that make this chord what it is. So a great triad that we can use is a triad built off of the flat 7, a major triad built off of the flat 7th. So if we're playing over a G7 sus chord, then we would use an F major triad. And this is fantastic because the three notes that we get in that F major triad would turn out to be the 7, the 9, and that fourth. So we're really hitting a lot of the stuff that makes this chord sound the way it sounds. And we're also doing something else really cool, which is we're superimposing an F major sound over this G7 sus chord. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just play a G7 sus with my left hand on the piano, and then plunk out that F major chord on top of it so you could hear it in kind of a block chord fashion. And then I'm going to play the first exercise on your PDF this week, which is just giving you some interesting triadic ideas using that F major chord. So first, let me play the block chord so you can hear what it sounds like. You can hear that it has a nice bright sound to it. You're hearing kind of that dual tonality happening between the root chord and then layering that triad on top of it. So now what I'm going to do is put on a little play along that's just playing, concert G sus, and I'm going to improvise over the top of it, first using the idea that I've written for you as the first exercise on your PDF, and then just going off and doing a couple of other things just for about 30 seconds or so. So this is what it sounds like in action using that F major triad over the G chord. So you can hear that's a nice sound, and one thing that you have to do is you have to come up with a bunch of interesting ways to play that triad. So you got to practice your triads in a bunch of different shapes, all different inversions, coming up with some interesting stuff to play with only 3 notes is a really important aspect of being more creative, right? You got to think about rhythm. You've got to think about these different ways to arrange these 3 notes. Okay, so after a while, you may want the sound of another triad, right? You might kind of play so much with just that regular F major triad that you start hearing some other sounds, and playing just one triad becomes a little bit redundant for you. So let's come up with a triad pair to use on this sus chord. Now, here's one of the things that I think is misconstrued about a sus chord, and that is that you can never play the third. Now, that's not true. You absolutely can play the third. One thing that we want to do, though, is we just want to avoid playing like the same material that we would over a regular G7 chord over a sus chord. That's not going to work so well. So like hanging out for an extended period of time on the third, I don't know if I really like that sound. But it's not that the third is off limits. It's just that we want to come up with a different way of playing over a sus chord than we would over a regular major chord. So with that as the caveat, the triad pair that we're going to use is that F major triad, and then we're also going to use a major triad built off of the root. So an F major triad and a G major triad in this particular key. So this is one of my favorite sounds to use over a sus chord, because if you rapidly change back and forth between the 2 different triads, it never actually sounds like you're playing in the key of G major. It sounds like you're kind of switching keys every time you switch the triad. And I think that this is a fantastic device that you can use over sus chords. I don't know, you'll have to be the judge for yourself, but I do really, really enjoy this sound. So this is example number 2 on your PDF, and it's very, very simply just moving up each one of those triads back and forth between F major and G major. So check out what this sounds like. So I just love that sound. It is truly my favorite thing to play over sus chords. And you could hear that that third does not sound offensive in any way. In fact, it sounds really sweet. It sounds like a very, very sweet note over that chord. And here's the beautiful thing about this triad pair. We've done episodes in the past talking about like triad pairs to use over major chords, and they're a whole step apart. So if you just transfer your 2 major triads a whole step apart and start them on the 7th instead of the root, you get this triad pair. It's almost like you don't have to learn anything new. You just shift the stuff that you already know around to a different part of the chord. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. If you've got any questions, please post them in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, and we could definitely start a discussion, talk about any of this. Let me know what you think about these 2 episodes. I'm thinking about doing a lot more of these kind of simplified things that deal with really common issues that people like my students have, and people out there struggling to make sense of this language. Just something that's really simple and applicable kind of right away. All right, so let me know what you think. I'm going to end this episode messing around a little bit with the triad pair and the F major triad, and just kind of trying to riff on some of the stuff that I was talking about. Okay, so if you want to get your hands on the PDF, go over to our Patreon site, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you can find yourself to all the PDFs. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week with some brand new episodes. Have a good one. Bye.